Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Raw podcast. I'm Phil Smith, joined by my esteemed colleagues Jason Jones and James Copley. We're going to have a chat through Sunderland's win over Millwall and everything else besides. So I think we're going to spend a lot of time today probably talking about penalties and our existential dread at the thought of potentially a penalty shootout deciding Sunderland season, because at the moment that does not feel like it's going to go too well for the Black Cats. But before we get to that bit, just want to get your guys' thoughts on the performance as a whole, because although it feels like quite a long time ago, obviously Sunderland had come on this game off the back of that Coventry City debacle, and I'm interested in what you two think of how, generally speaking, aside from spot kick drama, you felt Sunderland responded to that, James. So I'll start with you. How did you feel Sunderland sort of came back from that pretty shambolic performance at Coventry?
Well, at the moment, I feel really weird because Phil Smith's asking me questions, which is really strange and a definite departure from the norm. But welcome back, Phil, and congratulations as well. Yeah, I thought it was a needed, improved performance, wasn't it, against Millwall for Sunderland? I thought they did what they set out to do quite well. Millwall didn't really offer much. I think the stats bear that out as well. Sunderland were the dominant side. I think the only criticism we would have really is that Sunderland should have been further ahead, and that's sort of something that's perhaps dogged them through the earlier parts of the season. You want to see Sunderland kick on, really be clinical, put teams to the sword. That didn't happen against Millwall, which is a slight annoyance going into the playoffs. But I think, and Labrie touched on this after the game, actually, it was important, I think, to not win the crowd back round, but it was just a little reminder after the Preston and Coventry games, which were poor, that Sunderland have actually had a really, really good season. Everybody talks about that season under Mowbray when Sunderland got into the playoffs, and Sunderland's points totals now well beyond that. They've won more games, and I think it's just a nice little reminder that this season, although we don't know the outcome yet, for me has been very, very positive so far.
Yeah, it's interesting that, Jason, isn't it, in terms of James alludes to something there that we've talked about all season with this frustration that Sunderland aren't more clinical, that they don't necessarily kill games off. We talked a few times about the fact that there's only ever one goal in the game, and you can view it both ways, can't you? Which is Sunderland's doing unbelievably well to keep edging most of the time past these teams. And the other side of it is you feel like that's what's probably holding them back from going to the next level. And how did you feel sort of from this game, and how do you feel about this side? Because definitely a lot of clinical finishing is something we come back to time and time again.
Yeah, I think it's a frustration, isn't it? Like you say, when they're winning, it's something that I think we can all overlook and sort of learn to live with. Obviously, there have been times this season where it has massively hamstrung Sunderland and it's come back to bite them as well. I thought that on Saturday they were very good value for the win. I thought they deserved to win it. Like James sort of alluded to, Millwall barely laid a glove on them. I don't really remember Anthony Patterson having too much of naught to do, if anything, in truth. And Sunderland had the chances to go and really sort of stretch their legs and open up a bit of a lead and make it a lot more comfortable for themselves. And then, although Millwall didn't necessarily bother them in those closing stages, we did see that sort of familiar thing where for the last 5 minutes or so, Sunderland sat back, they were deep, they were compact, they were sort of seeing the game out, if you like. And it's going to continue to be a nervy thing for supporters when they sort of fall back into that pattern and they don't have the necessary advantage to just sort of ease themselves over the line, But I thought that by and large, there really wasn't too much to complain about in that performance whatsoever. Obviously, we'll come on to the penalty, I'm sure, and that sort of debacle. But aside from that and taking that out of the equation, I thought that Sunderland defended solidly. Again, I'm sure we'll speak about him, but I thought Alan Brown did wonderfully well coming in at right back. I thought Chris Mepham was towering at centre back. Trey Hume wonderful at left back. And then on the front foot, I thought they looked re-energised. I thought that, even though he'd been away on international duty, I thought the break looked as if it had done Chris Rigg the world of good. He looked more like the Chris Rigg that we were sort of accustomed to in the early stages of the campaign. And I think you could probably say the same about a few other players besides. Patrick Roberts, I know, caught James's eye in particular, and I thought he was wonderful as well. So all in all, a good performance from Sunderland. And yeah, not putting games to bed is a bugbear, but on the basis of Saturday and Saturday alone, I think Sunderland were very good value for those 3 points.
Yeah, I think after that Coventry game, James, we were all looking at this game, wanting to feel like, okay, that was the blip. Like, we're back, we're good. Obviously, we're not the perfect team, but did you feel that coming away from the game, even if it wasn't as comfortable in the end as we would have liked?
Yeah, I think so. Jason is quite right to mention that Sunderland were never really in danger. I don't think Millwall had their first attempt on target until around the 38th minute. I think I remember that correctly. I'm just looking at the stats now. They only had 2 on target all game. I think there was one straight at Patterson in the second half. You know, the biggest threat really came in the closing stages when Chris Meppen produced a brilliant block on a Millwall shot. Up until then, I was never really concerned generally by the state of play on the field. It's just always a little bit of a worry, isn't it, when you're heading into the last 5 minutes of the game and there's only a 1-goal advantage, especially when you've missed a penalty as well. You know, we know what Sunderland can be like and football could be like. So yeah, as we've said, that's the main frustration. But Jason's right to point out a few positives. I thought Patrick Roberts is nearing towards his best form for Sunderland. He had a really, really good game. And yeah, as Labrise mentioned, very important to return to winning ways and to get that confidence back up. It's just a strange position for Sunderland at the moment, isn't it? In terms of they are absolutely now going to finish in the playoffs. I think the 15 points clear now of Middlesbrough, who I think are in 7th place. That gap to the top 2 has shortened a little bit, but it still probably looks beyond them, doesn't it? With 7 or 8 games left now, so it's just a little bit of a strange spot to be in. But I think Sunderland is still a really, really good side, and once it does click in an attacking sense, hopefully that'll come in the playoffs, and it'll be just about time for it.
And let's talk about the match winner a bit, Jason, because I think at the moment Trey Hume's in a real purple patch in terms of his goal and his assist contribution. Obviously playing out of position at left back, something that I always think he looks really good when he plays there. To be honest, it's obviously not ideal, and that you want him sort of having the option to overlap as well as underlap, but. I mean, what a player this guy has been for Sunderland. Obviously, we're currently playing through a hip injury because of the other defensive issues. The thing about Hume for me is that when he's playing this well, he's amazing. And when he has a dip, like maybe he did a little bit earlier in the season, he was still good. Like this is just a guy who does not know how to dip below a 6 out of 10 performance. And at the moment, we're seeing him at the upper end. One of the best bits of business Sunderland have done in the last, I mean, you name it, how many years?
I mean, it's got to be up there, hasn't it? What was it, 200,000 to bring him in from Linfield? And I mean, he's repaid that so many times over. And, you know, God forbid it's not anytime soon, but if and when he comes to leave the club, who knows how much they'll get for him? Because, you know, he is arguably and has consistently been one of the best fullbacks in the Championship for quite a while now. I think you're very right to point out the fact that, you know, he goes over to left back and we say he's playing out of position, but that almost feels a little bit unfair on him in some respects, because he goes over there and he adapts so naturally. And, you know, he doesn't look particularly perturbed by the prospect of having to go over the other flank. So you sort of wonder how much he feels it's playing out of position, you know, or whether it's just an adaptation of a role that he's very, very comfortable in. I thought that, obviously, you mentioned there, because his stronger foot is his right foot, and he doesn't necessarily have the option of getting round Romain Mundle in the same way that he does Patrick Roberts. But I also thought that his ability to sort of cut in onto that right foot opened up new possibilities and dimensions for Sunderland. You know, I think the best example of that is obviously the winning goal. You know, it's a really smart corner kick routine, but the finish is just, it's one of those that you can almost tell that he won't have felt it come off his boot. He struck it so sweetly, you know, and I think it was just rewards for a performance which, even taking that out of the equation, was, like you say, just steady. He's just constantly, like, you can rely on Trey Hume. He's never really going to put a foot wrong. He's been wonderful for Sunderland this season. I think James gave him as man of the match, but he also said at one point on Saturday that there's an argument to be made for him being Sunderland's player of the season. I think it's a very strong argument. You know, I think Trey Hume's been nothing short of brilliant. And I think Saturday, even playing quote unquote out of position, he proved once again just how valuable he is to the Sunderland side.
Yeah, it's that old thing, isn't it? The best ability is availability, and I think the big tick in Hume's box is he just plays, doesn't he? And seemingly, no matter what the situation is, unless he gets himself suspended for some fruity tackles. But I think that's all part of the charm as well. Now, on behalf of the Raw podcast, I'd like to officially welcome Alan Brown to the Sunderland midfielders who've been converted into a right back club. It's a long and an illustrious list of cult heroes. But I have to say that when I was catching up with the news end of last week, and I kind of worked out that Brown was going to play right back, I wasn't that concerned. I think the reality is that, like, there is a reason why a lot of midfielders convert to fullback. He's got loads of energy. He's good in 1v1 duels. Like, he can handle the ball. It wasn't something I was too stressed about. What did you make of his performance, James? Because I do. Obviously, it wouldn't be ideal going into like a playoff final having a midfielder right back. But I think this is a definite option for Sunderland. I think it should be a role that suits him fairly comfortably.
Yeah, he fitted in well, didn't he? He was solid, dependable. I think his experience in the game is really, really underrated. He played so much for Preston over the course of 10, 11 years. I was saying to Jace after the game on Saturday that it's actually a really good way to get his experience into the side, you know, with that middle three being so young and Regis Lebris preferring them. He's had a struggle, obviously, with his injury issues to get into that midfield slot. So I think having him as an option at right back is really, really positive. He just went about his business really sort of competently, didn't he? His energy, his positional awareness was good. I thought he added a little bit of a threat in terms of his passing. And I think the biggest compliment you could pay him is that if you didn't know anything about Sunderland or Alan Brown and you were told that he wasn't actually a right back, you would be quite surprised, because he was just very, very good and very competent, and definitely a good option to have, I think, going into the playoff campaign. And it just goes to show, doesn't it? At times this season, we've had like injury or suspension crises, and we've maybe looked at formation changes as fans, as pundits, as laymen, you know, who's going to play where. And Lebris just does the simple thing, doesn't it? And 9 times out of 10, it works quite well. And putting Alan Brown in at right back and moving Trey Hume over to left back definitely kept the balance of that defence, and it proved to be a good decision in the end.
We know that like Serkin and Ballard, and hopefully won't be too long, but they're obviously not ready yet, Jace. Would you be prepared to stick with this for a couple of weeks, just to give, you know, if we're looking towards trying to get this big pool of players who are ready and match fit for the playoffs? Do you see this as a way over the next couple of weeks that we can get Alan Brown up to full match fitness?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's presented itself as a really viable option to Lebris. Obviously not one that you would have necessarily expected sort of a few weeks ago, but I really, really liked Alan Brown at right back. I was really impressed with him. You know, we were talking in the press box, and I said to James, like, all he really needed to do was, you know, just don't put a foot wrong. Just don't have a catastrophe. Be a body, be a presence, bring that experience. And in the end, he actually provided so much more than that. You know, I thought that, like James alluded to, obviously defensively he was very dependable, but on the front foot, I think that, you know, his pedigree as a midfielder really did come to the fore on occasion. His ability to sort of drop balls over the head of the opposing fullback and sort of bring Robertson and Rigg into the game in that way. Although it didn't necessarily bear fruit for Sunderland, it looked like, you know, just an added dimension on the front foot, which I thought was really interesting. And, you know, this Sunderland team doesn't necessarily find itself like resplendent in terms of its experience. Like, it does lack it in certain aspects, but I think that you're absolutely right. This is a good way of getting Brown into the team, and if he's going to keep on playing the way that he's playing, then I think you could almost argue that it's difficult to drop him. I know it's only one game and you don't want to get ahead of yourself, but there's a question that we were asked like on the whistle video on Saturday, and someone was like, well, you know, say Leo Hjelde comes back next weekend or whoever it might be, like, do you swap it back? Do you put Hume back at right back and do you drop Brown? And I really think the British would struggle to do that. I think Brown was so good, and also the way that it freed up Hume to play on the left, I think it's a really viable option for him. And I would be more than happy to see Brown sort of continue in the team until we start to see the likes of a Serkin back and, you know, sort of bolster it in that sense.
I think for me, based on that showing, and it's very harsh on Leo Hjelde, who I actually quite like, but I would rather Brown at right back than have Leo Hjelde in at left back. I just think it seems a more natural fit, and you do get the benefit of that experience. You know, we don't know whether Hjelde will definitely be available. Lebris hinted that he probably would be, but I'd be tempted to keep Brown in, keep the winning side, keep the momentum. And as Phil says, there is a long and illustrious history of this happening over the years. We've been threatening for years, but we need to do a full podcast on centre midfielders that have played. Because like Dan Neil's one that he played against Wigan, didn't he, a couple of seasons ago?
Left back.
Yeah.
Which is just absolutely hilarious now when you think back. And he did a good job and Sunderland won. But Yeah, if you're listening to this, send us your Sunderland midfielders who've been converted, because we will do that podcast when we get a chance over the next couple of weeks. But I think the thing for me is, as you've alluded to there, the other thing is it's not a slight on Hjelde. It's just like we've seen him at left back plenty, so we're not going to learn loads and loads about it, are we? Whereas I just think, we've got a little bit of a chance here potentially to have a look at Brown, see whether it's an option, and if you go away from home against a good team and it really doesn't work, then you've learned that, haven't you? And there's going to be plenty of games for Hjelde to play over the next few weeks. So
I do really feel for Hjelde though, because he's waited patiently all the season, and then all of a sudden you've got Dennis Serkin out, and it's looking like you're going to get a run on the side, and then you pick an injury up as well. It's unfortunate, because he would probably say as well that when he has played, he's been in and out, hasn't he? He's never really had like a run of 5 or 10 games, and I always say that it's really hard to actually judge a player until they've played 5 or 10 games in a row, and Hjelde just never has for us.
Yeah, but he's going to get minutes, right? I mean, that's why I'm kind of leaning towards sticking with Brown on Saturday, because we go away to Norwich, and then there's the Easter program. Like, you're looking at players like Chris Mepham, given the position Sunderland are in, I don't think they're going to play every minute of every game. So I just feel like I don't think it's going to be difficult for Lebreeze to get Hjelde back in at some point. So we'll see how that develops anyway. But listen, I've managed to get 16 and a half minutes without talking about penalties. I don't think I can go any longer. So I want to get your thoughts on it, but just obviously from afar at the weekend, like, I saw 09 had missed a penalty, and you know what? I've got no problem with 09 taking a penalty. I've seen him take 5 or 6, maybe. Someone will have the exact numbers for Sunderland, and they've all been
6.
class. So at 6, there we go. So I had no problems 09 not taking a penalty, but that was because I'd assumed that Isidore had been subbed off. That's the bit that, personally, and we'll get your guys' thoughts, and that was the bit that I just couldn't get my head around, because I understand he missed his last 2 penalties, and it was a bit of a disaster at Burnley and stuff, but he had an amazing record in his career before then. And I just think with the game situation, with where Sunderland are on the table, I just thought, what an opportunity to just put that to bed. Let Isidore take it, hopefully score it. I don't know. What did you guys think? I couldn't believe Isidore didn't take that penalty, given the situation. Listen, if we were playing Burnley again and it was the 90th minute
against James Trafford,
yeah. But I just thought that was a perfect opportunity. So there you go, Wilson, smash it in, and you're ready. What did we think?
No, those were my thoughts exactly. I would have liked to have seen Wilson step up. It's a perfect opportunity to banish the demons, and perhaps an indication that maybe that's still sort of in his head. He did actually say to us a couple of games later after the Burnley game that he would happily step up and take a penalty. Lebreeze hinted that it had been agreed before that Luke O'Nien was going to take the penalty. I mean, it didn't look like that on the pitch, and Chris Mepham actually confessed that he was surprised to see Luke O'Nien stepping up. So for me, like, it needs clarity, doesn't it? It needs some clarity. We said on the Whistle video, penalties are really important. Lebreeze said it after the game. It's the perfect opportunity to score in terms of XG. We're going into a playoff campaign. There's going to be big moments, potential shootouts. Like, it needs sorting, doesn't it? I do also think, although Luke O'Nien scored 6 of his penalties, they all come in shootouts. I think it's a little bit different when you've got attacking players on the field. I love Luke O'Nien. I think he's been a brilliant servant for Sunderland over 300 games. I think his technical ability with the ball at his feet is really exceptional and underrated. I think he passes the ball really well. I sort of have no issue with him taking a penalty in that regard, but as part of a 5 or 6 or 7, I think it's fine. But as your designated penalty taker, I'm just not sure. Call me old-fashioned, but I like it to be an attacking player. I know there'll be people screaming about Stuart Pearce and John McPhail and all those sorts of people. And I get that. People will also point to the fact that Kevin Phillips missed a fair few penalties as well. But for me, like, there's just better candidates on the field. Isidore, I mean, Mundle was annoyed, wasn't he? I wouldn't have mind seeing Job take one. I know Roberts has missed one this season. Going to contradict myself with attacking players, but like Trey Hume strikes a good ball, doesn't he? So I don't know. For me, yeah, it was a bizarre episode, and I think it's something that needs to be sorted pretty quickly.
I'm just trying to think of anyone you haven't named there. Pato, you didn't name.
So somebody pointed out on Twitter, actually, because somebody said, like, oh, well, Luke O'Nien has never missed a penalty, and then somebody else said, well, Jordan Pickford's 1 for 1, and you don't see him taking them forever, which I thought was.
I tell you what, I would back Pickford over most outfield players, because I'm interested when you say why do you think it's different in a normal game to a shootout? Because I'm interested in this, because I'll come to Jason in a minute, but obviously thankfully this penalty didn't matter in the context of the game, in the context of the season, but there could be a point where penalties really do matter. So I'm interested in why you think the dynamics of a shootout are different to a normal game.
Look, if you're the club's best penalty taker, then fair enough, you are, and then you go and take the penalty. But I don't think Luke O'Nien is, and I don't think we should pretend that he is, despite the 6 penalties scored. So to have him as one of a 5 or 6 or 7, fine, because he's got a decent record in shootouts, he's experienced, he strikes a ball well. But is he Sunderland's best penalty taker in an in-game situation? I just don't think so, and I think it's a little bit different.
Are you worried about penalties, Jace? Or do you think the dynamics of going into a shootout? Because to be honest, listen, anything can happen in a shootout. But if we get into a situation in the playoffs and Luke O'Nien's walking towards the penalty spot in a shootout, I'm as confident with him as anybody else. He might miss. Obviously that can happen. But I don't know. How worried are you about the prospect of a penalty shootout, given the way things have gone this season?
I think it's 4 in a row now that Sunderland have missed. I think I wouldn't be human if I wasn't a little bit worried by that. You know what I mean? The stats don't exactly fill you with confidence, do they? The O'Nien thing on Saturday, the more I've thought about it, we were baffled when it first happened. I think it's fair to say, me and James sort of looked at each other and were like, is he really grabbing that ball? And is he to take this penalty? And I think part of the issue. Well, yeah, and this was part of the thing. The more I've thought about it, I think it was almost like a victim of the spectacle, I felt. I think that there was such a sort of novel shine to Luke O'Nien grabbing that ball and taking it, especially, and it should be said, when you've still got Isidore on the pitch. Obviously, Mundle's reaction to it was one of, I think it's fair to say, frustration. And so there was almost this bizarre, novel, just curiosity about what was going to happen. And from that point onwards, it almost felt as if Luke O'Nien wasn't just taking a penalty; he was almost performing like a circus act. And I think that probably didn't help. but it almost certainly didn't help the pressure of it for him. I mean, look, he can obviously take a penalty. He scored multiple for Sunderland. I fully agree with James. I think it's disingenuous to pretend that he is Sunderland's best penalty taker. And I also think that, for me, I don't really understand why there is such a sort of obsession with rotating through players after they've missed a penalty. Players miss penalties. You can name the best strikers of Erling Haaland has missed penalties. Mo Salah has missed penalties. Again. Exactly. But they then step up and take the next one and have an opportunity to put it to bed. And the Isidore one, obviously I understand it was exceptional circumstances because he missed 2 and he missed 2 late on. It clearly got to him. He was visibly upset by it. But I do think that at some point since he has to have been afforded the opportunity to put that to bed, and he just hasn't. And so I don't really know where Sunderland go from here. I don't think Luke O'Nien will take the next one. I kind of, if I'm being honest with you, and this is nothing against him, kind of hope he doesn't take the next one. But yeah, it's just a baffling situation, isn't it? All around.
I think
it just feels like it's made it.
If Isidore gets to a playoff campaign and it goes to penalties and he hasn't taken one since the Burnley mess, and then he needs to take one, I think that's a bad place to be in, personally.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was. That's why I think this was such a big error, because now it's just made it a bigger deal. The next time he still has to take one, and I'm not saying that in hindsight. I would have felt the same way if O'Nien had buried it. I would have said, "Well done, Luke O'Nien, great penalty." But I still feel like that would have been the wrong thing, because now it's just made it a bigger thing for potentially one of your absolute key penalty takers. That's the bit I just can't get my head around now. Obviously, Romain Mundle was disappointed. The tricky bit for us on the outside is that, as you said, James, there seems to be a little bit of doubt as to how pre-agreed this was. It's obviously not great if the team had a discussion that was decided O'Nien was taking it. Sounds like maybe it was a little bit more of a grey area than that. But what was said at post-match, because obviously it's what we can all agree on, it is not great for players to be arguing over penalties on the pitch. There's so much histrionics now go around penalties from the opposition. And it is hard enough to protect your penalty taker from the opposition. You can't be doing it yourselves, can you?
No, I didn't think it was a great look. I don't think we need to sort of hang Romain Mundle out to dry or anything like that. I'd be concerned if he didn't want to step up and take a penalty. I think in a way he could spin it as a good thing. You wouldn't want to see it happen again. I'm quite happy for them to sort of have a pass on it. As I say, I do think there needs to be more clarity around it though, because as I mentioned before, Lebris was fairly adamant that Luke O'Nien was the designated penalty taker, but as I say, we spoke to Chris Mepham afterwards. He was surprised in his own words, and there seemed to be a little bit of deliberation. It looked to me like Dan Neil sort of pulled rank and said, like, Luke O'Nien's having it. So whether Luke O'Nien was the designated penalty taker, but because Romain Mundle won it, he stuck his oar in, and then it got a little bit heated. But as I say, I'm quite happy to give them a pass on that and give Romain Mundle a pass on that. He's a passionate player. He wants to add to his goal scoring tally, of which has been very good this season. Did win the penalty, but yeah, it's bizarre, really, isn't it? It's a very Sunderland thing to happen. This, and we're talking about like a penalty drama after a win against Millwall when we're like 15 points clear of seventh place. It's bizarre.
Okay, let's finish it. Quick fire round. Who do you want to take Sunderland's next penalty? James?
Oh, Christ. Isidore?
Jason?
Yeah, I'd be tempted to say Wilson, or to be fair, I wouldn't be opposed to Romain Mundle taking one. Give him a chance. If he fancies it, he fancies it.
Who's your 5, Phil, in a shootout? Or who's your 1 first? Who's your 1 first? Go with your 1, and then we'll work out a 5.
Well, the next one Wilson has to take, in my opinion. And if he misses it, then okay, we've got a big problem. Okay, I'm just making my notes now because you put me on the spot. So Wilson, definitely. I'm giving 0-9-1 in a shootout, 100%. Enzo, surely he can kick a football.
Yeah.
Like I know penalties are different, but come on. Having not seen him take one, I'm putting Mundle because he strikes the ball so cleanly. And then my 5th one, off the top of my head, I'm putting Joe because I feel like pressure situation. I fancy him. And then as my 6th one, I'm putting Alan Brown because he gives me smash it down the middle vibes, and that's what I want from my 6th penalty taker. So I've got Wilson, O'Nien, Lafay, Mundle, Job, and then Brown as my 6th. Who have you got?
I've got Wilson, Job, O'Nien, Hume, Trey Hume, and then Enzo, and then I've got Neil as my 6th. I think Dan Neil, captain, taking a penalty. Kin strike a ball, you would hope.
Jason, any major disagreements?
I don't know. I mean, we haven't even mentioned Patrick Roberts, which is kind of insane, bearing in mind that he was designated penalty taker at the start of the season. I would like to see Trey Hume take one. I think if there's a man for the big occasion, God, I don't want to tempt fate here, but you know what I mean? Like, I would have faith in Trey Hume is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I'd maybe chuck him in there, but I absolutely agree. Wilson's got to take the next one. Wilson's got to take the next one. Hopefully we don't have to consider the prospect of a shootout at any point over the next few weeks.
I am a big hypocrite, man, because I've said I prefer attacking players to take penalties, and I've named the number 6 as me 6 penalty taker, and then 2 defenders and be 5. So idiot, essentially.
Shootouts are apparently different, so
they are. You cannot tell me. You cannot tell me that being part of a 5 or 6 is different to being the guy who takes it in game.
So just to surmise, if it's in the game, it's an attacker. If it's a shootout, you want 6 defenders. That's the James Copley philosophy. Yeah, that's it. Right, we've got that sorted. Okay, so before I went away, the injury situation was getting marginally better, and now it is not. So, James, just there's been quite a lot of updates and news over the last 4 or 5 days. So, James, bring us quickly up to speed in terms of short, medium, long term. Where are we actually at with this thing?
Right, let me find me a list because it is quite extensive. I think the headline after the Millwall game from Lebris was that he said Enzo Lafay and Leo Hjelde should be back for the West Brom game. Ogunsui and Abdullahi are out. Obviously, Dan's nowhere to be seen at the moment. He said Poveda should be back soon, which is good. Dennis Sergen, he said it'll be another 2 to 3 weeks. Niall Huggins obviously absent in the long term, as is Aji Alisi. Jensen Seeltz had a little bit of a setback as well, although he didn't really provide a time frame. I suspect they might just try and get him right for next season, with it being such a sort of dangerous injury, that knee ligament injury. And obviously we already discussed Ballard, who's a couple of weeks behind Lefebvre at the moment, I think. So I think that just about covers it, unless I've missed anybody.
It sounds about right. I think everyone on my very, very long list, I'm pretty sure you've mentioned. Did you mention Samed?
I didn't. I think he's getting closer. I doubt it'll be West Brom, though, although you'll get a chance to ask him ahead of the game. But he was very non-committal on that.
So the return of Lefebvre is relatively imminent. Now, I imagine Sunderland are going to be super cautious with him, to be honest, over the next couple of weeks, because obviously another hamstring injury would be a bit of a disaster at the stage of the season. But Jason, just looking back to Lefebvre coming back, are we now at the point now where the Enzo out wide, I wouldn't say experiment, because it was actually pretty logical in the time given the situation. Is that over? Are we now just dropping Lefebvre in for Rig, in for Job, in for Dan Neil? Do you think that's the way forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think you sort of hinted at it there, but when he came into the club, Larissa's hand was very much forced by the sort of dual absence of Mundle and Watson. Obviously, both of those players are back now. Mundle started the last few games. Watson has made a couple of cameo appearances from the bench. I don't really see how there could be an argument for Lefebvre playing out wide ahead of either of those two. And it's sort of obvious that he was signed as a central midfielder, and it's sort of obvious that is his preferred position as well. I think it's actually really exciting to be able to, consider the prospect of him coming into this Sunderland side at this stage of the season, obviously with the caveat that Sunderland won't want to rush him back into the action. But, there is a version of this where, again, don't want to tempt fate, but we get sort of 2, 3, 4 weeks away from here, and Sunderland could have, quote unquote, their best attacking lineup available to them. If we sort of consider Mundle on one side, Roberts on the other, Lefebvre playing in behind an Isidora and Mayenda, obviously that would then give you the option to rotate Rig, and then Bellingham sort of floating around on the other side, that central three as well. So it's what he was signed for, and I still think that it's what Briss will ideally want him to be in this side. And I think that what we've seen of him, the glimpses that we saw of him, and the way that he was able to impact games from that wide position, the prospect of then putting him into a central role where he's sort of more readily involved in the sort of cut and thrust of the game, I think there is the potential for him to be a real game changer for Sunderland. So I think if and when he's ready, he's got to play in a central role for me.
I think this feels like quite a big deal for me, James, not just because of how good Lefebvre is, but I just think that even if it is sparingly initially, we've talked a little bit about how unusual this situation in the season is with where Sunderland are in the table. And I think in terms of keeping the momentum and also a bit of freshness, a bit of excitement among the fan base, I think dropping Lefebvre in is going to be a really big part of that. And of course, what it does massively is it puts real competition in centre midfield, which hasn't existed this season. And the three players who've played the vast majority of the minutes have been incredible, really, when you consider their age and how many minutes they've had to play. But I think just going into that playoff, I think that might just be the bit of edge that's needed in there for those players knowing that their place is under threat. Because let's be real, if Lefebvre is fit by the time the playoffs start, he's in the team, right? So I like the edge that's going to give to that midfield department over the next few weeks.
Yeah, 100%. It could be a real catalyst. I think we're all hopeful it will be a real spark. We haven't seen him play central midfield at all, have we, since he joined the club? And he was very much brought to the club as that. I mean, his skills on the left is in an unnatural position. Just thinking of the Middlesbrough game where he was like so majestic. What could he do in a playoff campaign with, 5, 6, 7 starts in the midfield under his belt? I think it is hugely exciting. I think you're right in what you say about Job, Neil, and Bellingham. They've played a lot of football. They've played a lot of football together, but they haven't really been pushed in terms of starting games, have they? So you're going to have to be on your mettle with Lefebvre around, because he is real quality. And I think, as Jace mentions as well, and I'm hesitant to say it actually, because Sunderland can do a Sunderland, and we might never see it knowing our look, but a sort of a front four of Mundle, Lefebvre and Roberts in behind Isidora or Mayenda that's quite nice. That's quite exciting. And you would hope that with the talent there, that would be quite dangerous and potent as well.
It's never going to happen, is it? Throw forward to next week where we're talking about Sunderland's 2 new injuries and attacking positions. But hey, we can dream for a little while. So West Brom on Saturday, obviously return to the Hawthorns, reunion with Tony Mowbray. What do you two want to see from that game in terms of, are there any changes you're considering making, or do you just say good win at the weekend, steadied the ship. We go again. James, I'll start with you. What are you thinking?
I think I'm keeping the same 11. Obviously, the bench looked really, really light, didn't it? With Tom Lavery, Ben Middlemass, Harrison Jones was on there. Who else was on there? There was another one. But obviously, you'd hope Lefebvre would come back into the mix, wouldn't you? Perhaps that bench will look a bit stronger with Hjelde coming back into it. So I think, I'd be minded to name the same 11 as long as everyone's okay and fit. I guess there is a slight question around Trey Hume in a sense that he has had this ongoing hip injury. Do you just sort of keep him in the rhythm of playing games and keep him up to speed? Or do you try and sort of nurse that at some point with 7-8 games to go? I don't know, maybe that's a question for another time. But I think if everyone's fully fit, go with the same 11 because I thought it worked well.
What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, it's a really boring answer, but I agree. I think that it's a combination of the fact that it did work against Millwall. You know, I liked Alan Brown at right back. I liked Trey Hume at left back. I thought Sunderland looked solid and, in a sense, sort of more creative at times than they have in a little while. You know, they had really good spells of pressure, which obviously in the games against Coventry and Preston prior to the international break, they didn't. And then also, as James sort of alluded to, there just aren't really a great deal of options available to Lebris right now. Obviously, you know, if Lefebvre and Hjelde are back in the squad, brilliant, but is he going to be sort of minded to bring either of those straight back in the starting 11? Probably not. You know, the other one, at some point you give Tommy Watson a start, try and keep him fresh and hungry and sort of fully incorporated in the side. At the same time, I think it'd be really, really harsh to drop Romain Mundle. So yeah, I think that for me, again, it's a huge caveat where Sunderland are concerned, but if everybody's fit, if everybody's available, then yeah, same 11 for me.
I do think West Brom at the Hawthorns will pose a little bit of a different test and a greater test to that sort of makeshift quote unquote backline than Millwall did at the Stadium of Light, because they didn't really offer anything. You know, a lot of that was to do with Sunderland's sort of good work in keeping the ball, but Millwall had a fair few injuries of their own coming into that day. It wasn't the strongest team, so I think West Brom potentially will pose a greater threat, and it'll be interesting to see how they cope with that.
Two tricky games, isn't it? Two tricky away games with Norwich coming straight off the back of that. It'll be really interesting after that Coventry game to see how someone manage that. So there we go. I think that is the Millwall game thoroughly dissected. So we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you everyone for listening. We'll hopefully be back, James, later in the week with a preview pod ahead of the West Brom game. All being well.
Hopefully with an opposition journalist, but if not, we'll rope Jason in and we'll just chat about Millwall. Sorry, we've already done that. We'll be chatting about West Brom. I'm going to be chatting about that again. God.
Yeah, no one is going to listen to that unless you come up with some new crazy penalty theories. So yeah, maybe. So right, well, we'll leave it there then. Thank you everybody for listening. Keep your eye on the Sunderland Echo website. There'll be absolutely stacks on there between now and the weekend. And as I say, keep your eye out on your podcast feed for the West Brom preview of some description later this week. Thanks for listening.